Welcome, everyone, to the No Bull, Just Bacon podcast. I am your host, Dr. Allan. With me here today is Coach Beth to answer all of your burning health and fitness questions from around the social media world. This is a rapid fire episode, and we have a ton of great topics to get to, so let's get rolling. First topic, when doing heel elevated squats, does the height of the block that you use matter? Could you use a wedge instead of maybe a block? Could you use Olympic weightlifting shoes? Would you like to field that one, Beth?
Sure. So for the particular exercise that this person is referencing, it's in our programming. And the heel elevated goblet squat that we program does intentionally have a higher elevation than I think what most people are used to. So in the video, I think the woman is standing on a red 55-pound bumper plate, if I'm not mistaken, which is quite high. So the height for this particular exercise is supposed to be about 3 to 4 inches, which is going to sound really, really high. The purpose of that, though, is to drive more of that knees over toes position to get more quad engagement and quad recruitment. However, there is some nuance to this, and it's going to depend on individual leverages. So somebody in our group actually posted a form check video of her doing these on something that was the same height as what she saw in the video. And just in looking at how she was standing on this plate, it looked too high for the length of her foot, for some of her leverages, and it was causing her to not really be able to keep the straight torso position that we wanted. So I encouraged her to actually use a shorter bumper plate, which she did, and it looked much better. So to answer the question for this specific exercise, we do want the riser to be higher than probably what most people are used to really drive that knees over toes position and really hammer the quads. Especially for our folks that have home gyms, there's not like every squat pattern that you're going to do is going to be pretty much the same. And this is a really great way to make sure that we are quad focused here. So I often will put this in, like if the gym folks have a leg extension, I'll put something like this in for the home gym folks, because you simply cannot isolate the quads the same way that you can in a leg extension with some of these other squat patterns. You're going to get more glute involvement in some of the squat patterns, which is why we choose exercises that have a higher heel elevation to really force that knees over toes position.
Yeah, and to put things in perspective here, if you look at Olympic weightlifting shoes, their risers are anywhere between like 0.6 inches and 1.5.
It's like a half an inch to 1 inch. So yeah. Lifting shoes are never going to be enough for this.
I mean, as a rule of thumb for me, when I do these types of things, I will use a 25-pound metal plate. The 25-pound metal plates will start to get you into the right direction. Sometimes people need a little bit higher depending on what you're trying to do and depending on your mobility. But if you're questioning, okay, well, what do I have available? The 25-pound plate can be good. A full metal plate can be good. Test those out. See where you feel most comfortable. See where you feel like you get the mobility and that you feel it most intuitively in those quads, and go with that, and you're going to be just fine. All right, next question. I've seen multiple articles that talk about how doctors say we are eating too much protein and that it's bad for your health. Is this bogus, and can you explain? So I actually started to see this recently, and I laugh every time I see this. And the person that asked this question had actually shared 2 articles, one of which is cited, the other of which does not appear to be cited. So we're going to ignore the uncited article because you can say anything that you want. And there's no reason to address that. Now, in the one that's cited, there is a study that suggests that with higher protein intakes comes some risks of things like cardiovascular disease, because this was an article written by a cardiologist. Now, keep in mind, just because an article is written by a cardiologist, and just because a cardiologist can say, hey, look, in these higher protein intakes, we do see things like increased risks for CVD, doesn't mean that the higher protein intake is the cause of that increased CVD risk. And in fact, when you look at the paper that this person is citing, in the paper itself, they don't say that the increased protein is the issue. The issue is that in the diets that they looked at under this report, when you see higher protein intakes, it means that people are generally eating more red meat. And this is not a study that looked at a smart omnivore diet that contains minimally processed, lean red meats versus a diet that has lower protein. It is they looked at protein intakes blanketly, and then they tried to make these associations. So the association is there, yes, but that is typically, and the paper itself actually touches on this, that is typically because when you're just looking at level of protein as your indicator of whether or not something causes CVD, oftentimes what you will also get with that are higher levels of saturated fat and higher levels of dietary cholesterol. It is really cool in the health and fitness space these days to say, oh, don't worry about dietary cholesterol because dietary intake of cholesterol has a very small effect on blood levels of cholesterol. Now, that is true in the majority of people, but there are subsets of people that have genetic abnormalities where it does affect you, especially if you have things like hyperlipidemia or other issues with managing blood lipids. On top of the fact that it probably is a little bit more nuanced than just saturated fat or just cholesterol in the diet. And this is something that I have spoken on other podcasts before about. I distinctly remember speaking about this on Max Lugavere's podcast, where I talked about the fact that, yes, looking at saturated fat as a general recommendation for Gen Pop to cut down is probably a good thing, but there's a little bit more nuance to that. And I think this is where that carnivore crowd gets a little bit of their panties in a bunch, and they do have a basis for saying this. There is more to foods than just the macronutrients. There's something called the food matrix. All of the constituents of food, both the things that we know about and the things that we don't really fully understand, that affect how they influence health. When we look at lean, minimally processed sources of saturated fat, like red meats, eggs to a large extent, full fat dairy, dark chocolate, the influence on CVD either seems to be minimal or non-existent. There doesn't seem to be a big concern with cardiovascular disease, assuming these foods aren't putting you in a major calorie surplus that is causing you to gain significant amounts of fat. So, what food are we talking about here? And so when people say, oh, well, these higher protein intakes are leading to some mortality outcomes. Well, higher protein has not been shown to do that. Higher intakes of fatty red meats have absolutely been shown to do that. Higher intakes of meats that have been heavily cured have been shown to do that. And so when we're just looking at protein intake and we're not considering, well, what are the sources? What does the rest of the diet look like? Is this person even eating fruits and vegetables?
Right. That fiber is
Because
going to mitigate a lot of issues.
both the fiber and the vitamin C are going to be very, very beneficial because you can even take some more processed and cured red meats. And if you co-ingest significant amounts of vitamin C, it prevents the formation of nitrosamines in the gut. When you prevent the formation of nitrosamines, you lower cancer risks significantly. And so that's why we might see concerns with people eating packages of bacon, and you'll see nitrate-free bacon or nitrate-free hot dogs or whatever it is. And there's a reason, because they want to lower those risks. They know that people have, a health focus on things, and they want to lower those risks of cancer. And so they'll give you nitrate-free versions. We never see the same concern with things like beets. But why? Beets have a lot of nitrates in them, but beets also come with a lot of vitamin C. And so we don't seem to see these things. There's more reasons than that, but that's one of the main reasons that we don't see those issues, is that we have built into this food essentially a defense mechanism against some of these negative health outcomes. And we're not thinking about this from a Western diet standpoint, where what we eat for dinner is like a steak and like pasta Alfredo, and there's not a fruit or vegetable in sight. So when we take these things and we look at the association, we can sometimes get an inaccurate causation out of it. And that's what's happening when they're trying to position protein, the protein number or the protein intake itself, as the problem in these situations. It's not the protein. It is the types of processing in these foods. It's the level of saturated fat. It's the level of cholesterol. It's all of these other issues that these foods may provide that are causing some of these associations. And if we have a better omnivore diet overall, if we're conscious about the amount of calories that we're taking in, if we're conscious of our body composition, I do not fearmonger lean red meat intake in a person's diet. And, for me, Even if I look at like the worst data, we're looking at maybe like a 5% relative risk increase for something like cardiovascular disease, and a relative risk increase at 5% is very, very small. So for me, it's like, well, is this person eating whole minimally processed foods? That's 99% of the battle to begin with. And if you're doing that, I don't see a reason to get on a person's back to say, oh, you can't eat that. You've got to eat this. And then they're like, well, I don't really want to eat some of these other things. And so therefore, I'm going to fall off my diet entirely. Whereas if I could have just had a little bit more red meat, focusing on the lean, minimally processed types, it could have been sustainable for me. I think that we need to keep things in perspective of what works practically in the real world and then be very honest about what the risks are by doing that. And I think that if you're having fruits and vegetables in a diet, this is majoring in the minor, and there are far bigger things to worry about than whether or not you're eating these whole minimally processed foods. When in a deficit, what should I expect in terms of strength? I know that I can't build muscle in a deficit, but what should I be looking for in terms of progressing with training? So that second part is actually wrong. You can build muscle in a deficit, and we've talked about this prior, particularly if you're brand new to training, if you're obese, if you're on steroids, or you're coming back from a long layoff, you can progress really, really well. You can progress marginally or modestly in a calorie deficit if you're outside of those categories. You just have to be patient and really trust the process. If you're not in one of those four categories, it can still happen, especially if you're keeping that calorie deficit closer to maintenance. The deeper that you go in that calorie deficit, the more likely that you will not build muscle or that you could even lose muscle. Now, strength is different. Strength outside of highly more advanced people and outside of relatively or very lean people, being in a calorie deficit, you can typically progress in strength just fine and to a great extent. Now, are you going to progress at the same level as somebody that's at maintenance or above? Probably not, but you can still progress rather well in a modest calorie deficit. And so her idea of I can expect progress in strength at least more so than hypertrophy is true in most cases. What should you expect? I mean, it's going to be different based on, your sleep, your training intensity, how good your program is, your genetics, all of these things add in, your nutrition, how good of a setup do you have for your nutrition? You could be in a calorie deficit, but are you eating the right types of foods to facilitate the best health and the best performance? What should you expect? You should expect that if you are monitoring your lifts over multiple weeks, over multiple months, to be able to see a trend of lifts going up, particularly in the lifts that are earlier in a training day. You can expect those to progress faster than any other lift. And in a calorie deficit in particular, the right expectation might be that those exercises that are later in the day, maybe you just hold steady for long periods of time, particularly if you're a more experienced lifter. And that's just because as those days go on, more fatigue will build up by the end of a training session. And so if you want a particular lift to progress as fast as possible, you make it the first or second lift in a training day. The other ones are supplemental to those main lifts. That's how, a workout day works. And this is one of the reasons why when we first start working with people and we get them working in proper volumes and in proper programming, a lot of times we'll hear people say, this is not a lot of volume in a single day. And we'll be like, this is exactly how much volume you need if you're using the right intensity, because throwing on more and more and more volume is just a band-aid fix for not being intense or just wanting to feel like you've burned. I mean, that feeling of, oh, I've got this massive pump or I can't move my arms anymore is something that a lot of people chase. And it's to their detriment from a progress standpoint. So understanding that strength will progress faster than hypertrophy from building lean muscle is the right expectation. I mean, no matter where you are, typically in a cycle, whether you're in a calorie surplus, whether you're in a calorie deficit, you will typically see progress in strength more readily than you will see lean muscle building. Lean muscle building just takes time. And so monitoring your progress over time can allow you to see those trends of that weight moving up, particularly in those earlier exercises in a session. Anything to add to that?
Nope. I think you covered it all.
All right. Can we talk about the best way to incorporate cardio for people who have never really done formal cardio consistently? This person in particular mentions that they're sedentary. They walk daily, they hike
They're
weekly,
not sedentary.
but they're not said. That's why I was actually getting into that. They said I'm sedentary, but I walk daily, I hike weekly.
Okay.
Um, when it's uh, as part of their daily life. And she averages 10,000 steps per day. Okay, first off, you're not sedentary, which is a
That's
good thing.
why I was going to say she's not sedentary.
Yeah, I was trying to get it all down because these questions are typically asked in long form, and I try to shorten it a little bit so people can kind of get the gist without having to listen to the whole thing. The idea for her is that she's not sedentary. 10,000 steps per day. If you're under about 6,000, I call you sedentary.
Yep.
If you're above 6,000 steps per day, I don't consider you sedentary. If you're above 10,000 steps per day, I consider you very active. 6 to 10 is probably, and this is unnuanced. This is personal preference, but this is based off of a rough estimation of what research shows us gives certain benefits. And having worked with hundreds of people, seeing where people move on the scale more readily than others. 6 to 10,000, I would say, is moderately active throughout your day. Above that is probably a higher activity category. So for a person that is getting as many steps and is hiking and is as active as they are, go in and just start doing cardio in a way that gets you moving faster than what you're typically used to doing, that you can sustain for 15, 20, 30 minutes. Set a goal and start to build up. If you can, monitor your pace and then slowly increase that over time. And that's how you build that capacity to be able to do harder and harder things. Now, it's probably a smart idea if you're doing something like programming from a specific coach or programming from us, for example. And if we give you, okay, well, here is an interval workout or a higher intensity type cardio session. Now we're going to be listening to the types of people that work with us and tailoring that to the people. But if you're given one of these things, the smartest thing, in my opinion, to do is to do a run through and don't think, okay, I'm going to go out as hard as I can and I'm going to absolutely kill this interval cardio workout. No, go through and run through it at about 50 to 60% pace and see how you feel by the end of it. Because a lot of times people come out of the gate really, really hardcore. And when there's somebody that's asking a question like this, this is not an insult. This is a fact. You are not going to understand pacing.
Yeah.
Which means you're going to come out of the gate too hard. And if this is like a 10-minute interval workout, you're going to be dead by minute 4.
Yeah.
The first minute, if you're not giving it your all, you're going to think, okay, I'm not doing anything. And that's not the way that it works. So please, when you get into these types of things, even if it's like a longer jog, go a little bit slower than what you think. Go to 50 or 60% capacity. Go at a jog that will allow you to hold a conversation. And then see how you do for that workout. Make a note of it in your logbook and then build on that in the future to be able to consistently get higher and higher and higher in intensity for whatever given period that you're doing. If you're going for distance, you may not be consistently trying to build on that feeling. You may stick at that feeling and just go longer and longer and longer until you've hit the length that you're like, okay, that's enough. And then start to build up that intensity. But I think that going into this, the most important thing, I think, for anybody that's thinking about doing cardio and is a little bit scared because they've never really done regimented cardio before, is to do these run throughs at 50 or 60% speed that I can hold a conversation level of effort. Do that first. It's literally going to take you 1 week to essentially get a rough dial in of where you should be. Because even at that 50 or 60% pace, by the end, if you've chosen something that's longer, like a 30-minute run, you might be kind of dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's okay, but at least you know where you sit, and then you can maybe just replicate that the next time. And you say, okay, good, this is where I sit for this. And I'm going to get slightly better each time. But it's a good idea to do these run throughs because I guarantee you that if you go out and you just try to say, okay, well, I'm going to go hard because cardio has to be hard and that's the way that it is. Yeah, I mean, cardio can be hard and the higher intensity work is hard, but it doesn't have to be hard your first week or two.
And honestly, most cardio work, if you're talking about those cardiovascular adaptations that we've talked about in previous podcasts, it actually should be pretty easy. So this person is actually in our group fitness, and we have 2 cardio days programmed for our group fitness folks. We have one day of zone 2. And again, remember, zone 2 is not about a specific zone of heart rate. It is about perceived effort. It should feel easy. You should be able to sing, not speak, but sing the alphabet song while you're doing this and not be gasping for breath. And we have about, I think, 45 to 60 minutes of that programmed on one day. So for this particular person, I might start there. Don't start necessarily with the higher intensity stuff. Start with the easy zone 2 work. And instead of 45 to 60 minutes, do 20. Do 20 minutes of super easy cardio, like go run, go row, or if you want to hop on 3 different machines, 10 minutes a machine and do it that way so that it breaks it up for your brain, whatever. But get used to that duration and sort of build up over time. Then start to add in the intensity work. And to Allan's point, everybody messes up the intervals. And our intervals they're not always the same. So some of our interval training is true high intensity interval training, which is designed to absolutely kill you. Like if you do high intensity interval training correctly, you at the end of even just 10 minutes of it, you should be obliterated. And most people severely mismanage how they go about doing high intensity interval training. So our harder cardio day is more traditional, what I would call interval work, not true high intensity interval training. They're different. But we'll prescribe a specific either, like I think the one that we just did was like hill training. So it was a specific incline on the treadmill. So to Allan's point, though, I think feeling it out, because the first time you bump yourself up to an 8% on the treadmill, you're going to die if you don't take that easy. So to get an understanding and a feeling of what it feels like to go from a slow pace to a fast pace to a slow pace to a fast pace, and what that does to your heart rate into your physical being cumulatively over the course of the workout. A lot of people mismanage and misunderstand what they're going to feel like at the end of that workout when they're at the beginning of that workout. And I promise you, if you go out of the gate too hot on this stuff, you're going to have a really bad time.
So we always recommend at least 2 cardio days for everybody, whether you're in a bulk, whether you're in a cut, no matter what your goal is. It's just a health thing. And it actually does help with hypertrophy and strength.
It does.
But for those people that are just starting out and are a little bit intimidated by this type of thing, don't even feel like you have to do the higher intensity stuff at first.
If all you 2 days, like just pick one day and do it.
I mean, if you want to, you can even just do you can just double up on that zone 2 day.
Slow stuff.
I mean, I'm not talking about people doing our program. I'm talking about like anybody that wants to do this type of stuff and wants to start getting into endurance work or improve their health and improve their ability to build lean muscle and everything like that. You got to start somewhere, right? And if the higher intensity work isn't where you are right now, and a lot of people, that's not where you start.
Not gonna be
that's okay. It's not a problem. Start out with the zone 2 stuff, do it twice a week, and then slowly build up with that zone 2 stuff, and then switch one of those zone 2s over to a higher intensity work later. And that's completely fine too. But the important thing, like Beth said, even with things like we'll cut the time in half, is that you do it. Because if you start to do it, that's how you get that foundation to be able to do further and further and further. And it builds the habit of actually going in and doing it as opposed to sitting on the couch and doing nothing.
Right. And that zone 2 work, what they call base, it's called base work, building the base, building the aerobic capacity. That's actually what enables you to be able to perform that higher intensity work in a more efficient manner. So that's why I would recommend starting with the zone 2. And again, I cannot emphasize this enough. Zone 2 does not mean you're sticking to a particular heart rate zone. It means you're sticking to a particular effort. I have to say that a ton because I feel like zone 2 is getting like really mismanaged on the internet these days. And people are talking about how they can't, if they go to do a slow zone 2 run, they can't stay in their designated heart rate zone for like their heart rate will spike. That means you're deconditioned. But if your effort feels easy at a higher heart rate, you're fine. What is important is the effort. So you might like if your max heart rate is in the 180s, your zone 2 is probably in like the 105 to sort of 115 range. If you can't go and do a run and not have it spike above 115, that doesn't mean that you're not in zone 2. Okay. So I really want to make sure that that's clear, that we're not talking about a specific heart rate zone. We are talking about a specific feeling and an RPE essentially as you're moving through this type of cardio work. It should feel stupid easy.
Rating of perceived exertion for
Yeah.
people that are wondering what RPE is. It is
Yeah.
just a subjective rating of how you're feeling. Now, zones, depending on what coach you talk to, one coach might use heart rates to define their zones. The reason that we don't is because, like Beth said, some people are deconditioned, some others are
Most
not.
most people are
And
deconditioned.
yes,
Zone work is only really applicable for people who have already built their base and can go like I'm not even conditioned enough to do a zone 2 run. Like my heart
with heart
rate,
rate, she means.
yeah, my zone 2 is 105 to 115. If you ask me to run and keep my heart rate at 115 or below, you're talking 15-minute miles. I might as well be walking.
So
And when that's
these,
with all the running that I do. So that's why I do not want people wrapped up around this. We are not, none of us are marathon runners. We
yeah,
don't need to
and
worry
if
about
you're
this.
sitting with more muscle or more body fat, it's going to raise your heart rate when you're doing stuff because it's going to take more effort to move that body.
Yeah.
So yeah, RPE tends to make more sense for the majority of people. If you're a seasoned hybrid athlete or distance runner or something like that, maybe you're going to be using heart rates,
Yeah.
and that's okay. But I just wanted to put out the fact that like you might see another coach say this. We're
Yeah.
not disagreeing. We're
They're
saying
not wrong. It's
they're
just
not
in the
wrong,
application that we're talking about.
right?
People get really hung up on like looking at their watch and like, oh, I'm above 115, therefore I'm
Right.
not like, don't worry
When
about that.
when they shouldn't be, because I think that a lot of times those endurance coaches don't give the nuance of, okay, this is
Yeah.
not like they're going to put it out online, but then they're like, it's not relevant for 99% of you. So don't
Yeah.
even, and that's what's missing from that conversation.
Yeah. Agreed.
All right.
Agreed.
Should we do no carb or low carb on rest days or lower calories on rest days? People ask questions about carb cycling and calorie cycling all of the time. I mean, this is like one of the most concerning things for people. The answer is no, you should not do that. For the large majority of people, making a change in calories, you build muscle on those off days. You need calories. There are times where you might cycle carbohydrates for specific reasons, but that tends to be in extreme situations. Like people that are in contest prep might want to prioritize their weekly carbs before their workouts when they're leading into peak week. Certain distance runners might do it for certain reasons. Everyone else, no, don't worry about that because, you're hitting the gym, you're doing cardio occasionally, having carbs after the gym, after cardio on off days helps replenish those muscle glycogen reserves just fine. It is not a negative. And keeping those levels up will assure that you've got better satiety going on most days. You've got the nutrients that you need coming in on most days. And so it's not really worth it to make nutrition as complicated as possible when there's no real benefit for it. And so people will be like, well, why don't you do this or why don't you do this? This coach says to do this calorie cycling. It's not going to give you a difference in results. And it does complicate things. And as I've talked about before, I have done some versions of calorie cycling, like a 4-3 or 5-2 calorie cycling with specific one-on-one clients that request it because that's the way that they enjoy eating. So maybe I'll give them, okay, these are your macros for Monday through Friday, and here's a different set of macros for Saturday and Sunday. And the macros for Saturday and Sunday are slightly higher. Now, I'm not telling them specifically have to have carbs here or have to have carbs there. What we're doing is they have a tendency to eat more when they're sitting around on the weekends versus when they're at home, when they're in the middle of their work and their mind is occupied. When you do that, you can as long as the difference in those days is not major. You're not having huge discrepancies. It's not 1,000 calorie difference on
Yeah.
Saturday, Sunday versus the week. That is, you're screwing up. It's like 200 calories
Yeah. And
difference.
it's like an extra snack.
Yeah, at most.
Yeah. We're not talking about like sub maintenance calories all throughout the week and then binge eat on the weekends.
I mean, essentially, if you're doing that, one, you're underfueled for the entire week.
100%.
And then you're instilling like a binge restrict style
Yeah.
mentality. And this is, it's just something that you want to stay away from.
Yeah.
It's not super productive. I mean, sometimes we fall into that pattern by accident. You know,
Yeah.
we have like Super Bowl is coming up on like Monday. And so that day we have a massive amount. And then the rest of the week we don't have a ton. And I'm not a big fan of like punishing yourself after a large day of eating anyways. I think that you should just get back on track because a single day of overeating, which is what most people would consider this in an example like I gave, is not going to really throw you off that much. And so as long as you get back on track, you avoid that idea of looking at it as it was bad and now I need to make up for it. You get back on track with eating right and you stick to the routine that you had before. And sticking to that routine and really building that habit is worth more than anything else. So if you stick to that routine, you just get back, you avoid that good and bad dichotomy of looking at the way that you eat, and you don't have to stress over, well, how am I going to eat on this day that I otherwise would feel like I need to punish myself for, you know, and really saying, oh, I can't have any food. That's not a great way to live anyways. So do the best that you possibly can and keep things as standardized for most people, keep things standardized every day. You don't have to do anything different on off days as you do on days. You just need to hit your targets and fuel yourself. You're going to have an idea on this one, Beth. Thoughts on the Hyrox craze? I actually thought that this would be a good question to address because I have been getting a lot of questions about it in my Q&As. And I am admittedly not intimately knowledgeable about Hyrox. I've looked into it on the surface. I've looked into the way that they set up their competitions. I've actually checked out the exercises and the way that they split things up. And it is essentially interval cardio, it appears
Yeah.
to me. It's an interval cardio program that's done in a competition format.
Endurance intervals, I would call it, because the runs are not short.
They're kilometer, right?
Yeah. Um, and how much are the row and the ski? Because I know those are involved as well. I can't remember the distances on those. I feel like those are also a km.
I can't remember, but even the ones that they're considering like strength work, like the
Wall
sled
balls.
pushes and pulls and wall balls, it's not
Yeah, those aren't
really.
really, it's not really, those, they're still
Uh,
cardio.
it's
Those are
it's
still going to
like
feel cardio.
we're working fast and loose with the term strength work,
Yeah,
and
so
so
I sort of envision it as like it's like it's endurance intervals essentially, but they
yeah.
break it up in a way that's sort of like participating in it. Your brain, you take a break from the running to do something different, right? So it's been interesting as a former like competitive regional level CrossFit athlete to kind of see this come into the scene and especially see a lot of the people that I did CrossFit with sort of moving into this high rock space because it is a lot of CrossFit movements. The ski, the row, running, wall balls, burpees, all of that is in Hyrox. So a CrossFit athlete would be a good candidate for Hyrox. It does not include all the super high level barbell cycling. There's no deadlifts, there's no snatch, there's no clean, there's none of that. And it doesn't involve any of the gymnastics work, which is pretty nice because that's the gymnastic stuff is really the really hard part of CrossFit. I personally like I don't have anything negative or overly positive to say about it. It's I liken it to CrossFit. It's almost a sport in a way. So I don't like if somebody wants to do it, knock yourself out. I think it looks fun. I would actually be interested in doing at least one High Rocks race, but I know Alan will never do that with me.
No, I won't. No.
But I would do one just to kind of see what the fuss is about. And because I'm very intimately familiar with all of the movements and I know I'd be good at them.
I can already tell what the fuss is about, and there's not enough strength work in there for me to like I don't mind having like the endurance work broken up with strength work, but like this is like all endurance
It's all
work.
endurance work. But
Yeah.
the only like thing for me as a competitor that I would hate about it is that it's the same every time. So every time you go to a competition, it's the same workout. So you can train specifically for it, which I guess is good because there's going to be a high amount of specificity of training in something like this. But my competitive inner athlete would be bored, I think, after a while with this stuff. But I dig it. Like it's another thing for people to do that gets them active and gets them moving. So I love it. Rock on.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is going to sound super ignorant. It's probably going to piss off the Hyrox people, but for me, it's CrossFit Light.
Yeah.
And I say that because it contains movements that were all standard in CrossFit,
And that's
but
why
it,
CrossFitters are good at it.
right, but it removes the high skill requirement work.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that as like a negative thing or anything like that because it's still hard as hell to do.
Yeah.
But honestly, if we're talking about like skill intensive work, it's removed all of the really high skill requirements from CrossFit and just made it base. And so for those people, this could be a good thing. It can be a good thing depending on how you look at it. So for those people that were scared of CrossFit because you're like, well, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to get a ring muscle up. I don't ever think I'm going to be able to do handstand walks. I don't think I'm going to be able to do Olympic weightlifting. I don't think I'm going to be able to do, handstand push-ups. Well, now you don't have to. It's Hyrox got rid of all that stuff, and so it is a lower barrier to entry for a lot of people. So it will
Yes. Yeah.
probably serve a larger portion of people.
Yes.
And I
100%.
I can see this as being an okay thing as an adjunct to a strength training program as the cardio program. If you want to do this as fun on the side and not necessarily do this like 5 days a week, if you're using this as your cardio,
As your full training modality.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You could use this as an adjunct to a proper strength training program and you would probably get a lot of benefits out of it. And I think that the community atmosphere to these types of things can be invaluable. I think it's great. So I'm supportive of Hyrox. It's not for me, but I think that it's great. And a lot of people seem to enjoy it. And I know that a lot of people have become disenfranchised with CrossFit as of late. And so it gives some of those people an outlet and gives other people who were a little bit intimidated by CrossFit a way to dip their toes in it. Who knows? Maybe you do this first and you realize that you really like it and you get better and your endurance gets up, and then you're like, okay, I'm ready for CrossFit. And
Yeah.
I see athletes functioning back and forth between these
Agreed.
two quite often,
Agreed.
being traded back and forth based on how people feel, what they want to do at any one time. And some people, I bet, will have memberships to both CrossFit and Hyrox gyms.
Yeah. I mean, people like Tia Toomey, like she won the CrossFit Games this year. She's been competing in High Rocks all year, and does very well for obvious reasons. But a lot of the like former endurance-y CrossFit people, like Christy Aramo and some of those other ones who used to always excel at the CrossFit always has like a super long endurance event at some point during the games. And Christy Aramo used to always win that shit. Like just she used to win all the runs, all the rows. Like she's got a great engine. And she does Hyrox and is really, really good at it. So I do agree. I think you're going to see a lot of crossover with this. Um, I don't know. I would try my hand at one. I'd be a one and done though for sure. I'd be like, okay, that was like 8 miles of running. I'm finished for the day. I don't need to do anymore.
Yeah, I'll come and cheer you on. It'll be fun from the sideline for me. Recommendation for being chronically hungry and still getting between zero point 0.5 and zero point 0.7 grams per pound of body weight. I don't know what that is. I'm assuming protein, maybe, because there's no indicator of what zero point 0.5 to zero point 0.7 grams per pound of body weight.
I'm gonna assume protein.
I am too. That's actually low on
Yeah.
protein. So you may be chronically hungry because you're under eating protein. When we look at the research here, the floor for maximizing lean muscle return with protein is 0.72 grams per pound of body weight in the non-obese. In some research, it's zero point 0.8. I kind of flop back and forth depending on who I'm talking to, whether I recommend 0.72 or 0.8. It's the 1.6 grams per kilogram. thing. Um, I think that if you're hungry, it is, and this person is saying they're chronically hungry, your calorie deficit is either too low or your food choices are off. But I can tell you from the information that you're giving us, based on context clues, that your protein's probably low. And that's probably one of the biggest things that's an issue. More lean, minimally processed meats. If, we've talked about shrimp in the past, shrimp and
Oh my
whitefish.
God.
If you want to not be hungry, shrimp, deli, turkey, or whitefish are about the most filling things possible. Pork tenderloin is really good there.
Absolutely insane.
But fruits and veggies should take up a majority of your meals. And particularly if you're in a deeper cut, it's going to be necessary to be able to get nutrients in. But the people that are really hungry are usually not taking advantage of all of the things that they have available to be able to stave off that hunger. And, chicken thighs tends to be something that like all these people eat instead of some of the leaner cuts of meat that could have twice as much volume.
Yeah.
And so, one, for this person, shoot for that 0.72 to zero point 0.8 grams of protein per pound of body weight and adjust your food choices so you are choosing foods that may better support satiety in what you're doing. Higher fiber foods,
Yep.
higher protein foods, and combinations of those that have lower calories tend to work
Yep.
really well.
So potatoes versus rice. Polenta is an incredibly high volume carbohydrate source. The other thing that I would look at is how many meals a day you're eating. I know a lot of people, when they go into a cut for whatever reason, they eat more times a day, but smaller meals, which is not like, I feel like you get hungrier that way versus eating fewer but larger meals. So you can also play around with the number of meals that you're eating per day and the caloric allotment of those meals. And the final thing is, and I don't think this gets talked about enough, y'all are just wolfing down your meals. And I talk to clients about this all the time who tell me that they're starving all day long. These people are like hoovering their meals down in a matter of 2 minutes. And if I've challenged a couple people, I'm like, I want you to actually set a timer for 10 minutes and have it take you 10 full minutes to eat a meal. So picking up a bite with your fork, putting your fork in your mouth, putting your fork down, fully chewing, fully swallowing, taking 5 huge sips of water, and then picking your fork back up. If you slow down the speed with which you eat, I can guarantee you're going to have far less hunger. I can pretty much promise that.
Yeah, and also when you have a lot of times when people say that they're hungry, they're actually getting cravings.
Yeah.
And so if you're getting a craving, make a promise to yourself that you're going to wait 20 minutes before giving into that craving because most of the time that craving passes. If you're consistently giving in, you're going to consistently think that you're hungry, and the way to fix that is to give in.
Mm.
And that's typically not the right way to look at this. And so people have issues with identifying the difference between physical and hedonic hunger or emotional hunger. It's hedonic and emotional versus physical hunger. And there are different cues to be able to identify this. And when you put this in for the show notes, Beth, put a little note of the differences between hedonic and physical hunger. So I want people to be conscious of the fact that there are two different ways that you could be hungry. They're both experienced as hunger. The thing is, hedonic or emotional cues for hunger are located in the mind. They're not located in the stomach. So you're not getting the stomach pangs, the cringes that you're usually getting when you're physically hungry. Your mind is lit up. You're focused on texture, the experience, the taste, the feelings that it's going to give you. And this can be a very, very powerful thing to drive you to get food. And if you eat food and you didn't think about this until after, I mean, one of the big differences between physical hunger and hedonic hunger is physical hunger doesn't typically come with any sort of guilt. And so if you're eating this food and you're feeling a little bit guilty about eating this later, it was probably not a physical hunger. And ultimately, I always tell people to do the apple test. If you're hungry Ask yourself, would an apple solve this problem? And if the answer is no, there you go. That's it. It's a hedonic hunger. It's an emotional hunger. Because if you are physically hungry, literally everything sounds good. And if you're telling me, no, I don't want that, I want brownies, I want cookies, I want whatever it is, well, you're looking for an experience. You're looking for a mouthfeel. You're looking for the way that it makes you feel. You're looking for 5 minutes of feeling good before the 2 days of feeling guilty and shameful. And so that's not to say that you can't have cookies. That's to say, be conscious of the way this affects you. Be conscious of the fact that there is emotional and hedonic forms of hunger, that they're not the same thing as physical hunger. Having a little bit of physical hunger when you're losing body fat is expected anyways, and it's okay. But when you take a step back and do the apple test and ask yourself how this makes you feel, you can be more prepared to wait those 20 minutes comfortably and then say, okay, well, do I really want this after the 20 minutes? And if the answer is yes, that's okay. Because you're now not making an emotional choice. You're making a choice from a position of being conscious of what you're eating. And that's the really important thing, because when you make that choice out of a sense of control, there's a lot less shame, there's a lot less guilt. You have a better relationship with food. This is why there aren't good or bad foods. There are more nutritious and less nutritious foods, and there is a more appropriate time to have an indulgent meal and a less appropriate time to have an indulgent meal. And so you figure out what is right for you. And as long as it's not an emotionally driven choice, you can't be mad at yourself for making that choice later. So I think that all of these things are really important when we talk about this, but I wanted to bring that up because I think that people just aren't aware of the fact that there are these two main ways that you can sense hunger, because it, without thinking about it, it feels very similar. And you're like, I'm hungry. People never say, I'm emotionally hungry, because we're not cued into the fact that there are different types of hunger. So when you're conscious of it, you can identify when it's happening, and then you can make the right decision for you at that time. Sometimes that's eating the Oreo. Sometimes that's just not going to eat. And that's okay too. That is a perfectly valid choice to make, saying no to one of these foods. It's perfectly valid. Should carbs be consumed with protein to maximize muscle protein synthesis? You do not need to eat carbs with protein to maximize muscle protein synthesis. No. So, like, this question is often asked in relation to, hey, after my workout, I'm going to have a protein shake. Should I have some carbs with it? No, not for muscle protein synthesis purposes. There might be a reason to have carbs there. Maybe if you're training again later that day, maybe if you're in a competition scenario and you've got another event coming up in a few hours, yes, then have some fast carbs there. If you're doing 2-a-day training with a physique or bodybuilding style training, yeah, you should probably have some fast carbs there. But it's to restore muscle glycogen stores, not because we're worried about muscle protein synthesis lacking without carbs. Muscle protein synthesis is going to do what it's going to do based off of the amino acid profile of the protein that you give it, whether or not carbs are there. Okay. So carbs can slow the digestion rate of the protein and prolong the MPS spike. It's less dramatic, but it's prolonged. That can happen. But in the context of what should I do as far as like my day-to-day practices, it doesn't matter. It's not going to make a difference from a results standpoint. So eat your carbs whenever you feel like you want to eat your carbs, and save the carb timing for special occasions that might need it. You're probably going to have a thought on this, Beth. What is an ideal length of calorie deficit for fat loss? How long should it take? So the answer for this is it typically takes as long as it takes. And there's been some significant research that has looked at refeeds. They've looked at diet breaks, refeeds being 2, 3, 4 day periods where you dramatically up carbs and calories in an attempt to restore hormones. It doesn't seem to work from a hormone standpoint or any kind of physiologic standpoint. It can help people mentally and emotionally. Same thing with diet breaks. They don't seem to, even like a 1 or 2 week diet break doesn't seem to restore hormones or do anything to resting metabolic rate, but it can make people feel better. And when we look at research that looks at a fat loss phase over longer periods of time, like if we look at 8 months with a person that did refeeds, or 8 months of the person that didn't do refeeds and just went all the way, they both seem to get to the same place at roughly the same time. What ends up happening is the people that try to stick rotely to it often tend to have a little bit less adherence along the way. And so by the end, it's almost a wash. So for people, it kind of depends. Are you moving along emotionally and mentally? Are you feeling good? What's happening under these time periods? I mean, when we work with clients, we specifically ask questions in our biweekly forms, in their check-ins, that look into their hunger levels, their emotional state, how they feel their performance is going at the gym. And we're actually looking at all these for this purpose.
Mhm.
We're identifying, does this person feel good right now? Are they feeling things that they should given where they are? I mean, if you've been dieting for 6 months and you're like, I'm a little bit hungry, I'm not going to look at that and say, okay, well, that's abnormal. But if you're saying, I dread getting into the gym, when you used to not say that, when you're saying, hey, it's really hard for me to stick to adherence now when it wasn't before, I'll say, hey, like, let's get out of this calorie deficit for a while. Let's give you some more food. It's probably not going to slow you down long term because if we don't do this, you're going to go off the rails anyways. And so when we talk about the length of a calorie deficit, how long should you be in one for fat loss? The answer is until you get to your end goal or until you find it unsustainable emotionally and mentally. And both of those are completely fine. Just because you pull yourself out of the calorie deficit at some point because emotionally and mentally it's not sustainable doesn't mean that you're not going to go back in at some point. It means you are human and you need a break. So bring yourself up in calories, get comfortable, spend some time feeling better, and then go back down when you're ready. And I think that that's the best thing that you can possibly do because I don't think that there's a rote time period that anybody can give you, like 2 months is as long as you should be in a cut. No, that's not true. I mean, how much more
Agreed.
body fat do you have to lose? How sustainable is this for you? There are certain people that I found that the better question is this something that I can keep up for the rest of my life? And I'll have people that'll be like, I want to have really distinct six pack of abs, right? Now, ab display has a lot of genetic component to it. So for me, I might be able to display abs at 15% body fat. For somebody else, you might need to get down to 10 or 11% to display abs. I might be able to sustain 15% body fat easily with the way that I eat. You may not be able to sustain 10 or 11%. And so the question of should I be going, how long should I be staying in this deficit is less of a pertinent question than is the effort that I'm putting in now sustainable for me long term? And if it's not, maybe it's time to pull out for a little bit and then go back down in later when you're feeling a little bit better. Because if it's an unsustainable thing, if you feel restricted, if you feel like I'm being forced into doing this, I'm not really enjoying myself, well, change the scenery.
Yeah.
Start to focus on performance, get stronger in the gym. There's so many things that we can improve on. And that's one of the great things about fitness is people always talk about, oh, well, it's never done. And that's frustrating to me. That's a good thing. There's something else that you can chase and you can change that scenery. You can do something different for a while. Maybe you stop doing bodybuilding and you do Hyrox for a little bit. Maybe you change things up. Maybe you don't run on a treadmill anymore. Maybe you run outside. Maybe you go swimming instead. Maybe there's so many different things that you can do to keep yourself mentally and emotionally stable that forcing yourself into this just because your ultimate goal might be to be lower body fat percentage doesn't mean it has to happen today. So feel those things out. Now, I'm not saying jump ship because you had a bad week. Typically, I will not take a person out of a cut until they have 3 or 4 down weeks in a row. And when I see multiple check-ins and the person is just doom and gloom, I'm like, okay, it's time to come out. And what's really funny is those doom and gloom people, when you're like, okay, well, we're not going to be in a calorie deficit anymore, they get super doom and gloom about not being in a calorie deficit. And it's like, well, what do you want? Because you're not happy in the calorie deficit. You're not going to be happy out.
Miserable. Yeah.
Yeah, and this happens every time. And so I'm not getting down on people that feel this way. I'm going to point out that you're often going to feel this way because the majority of people do feel this way. If you have not reached your fat loss goal, you will feel that coming out of that fat loss is somehow either a defeat or now that you're out of the fat loss situation, you're not doing anything. And that is literally the most damaging thing that I see people do on a fat loss journey. When they're trying to lose body fat, they view not being in a cut as doing nothing. And I got to tell you, you're going to spend the majority of your life at not in a cut.
Yeah, you should not be spending your whole life in a calorie deficit. So you need to figure out how to live at maintenance. And what better way to do that than a diet break? While you're still under the tutelage of a coach, that's a super important learning period that not enough people take advantage of.
And it doesn't mean that this is a time period where all of a sudden you just don't track.
Right.
It can, depending on what's going on emotionally, but then you make a plan on when you're going to get back on track with tracking. But the biggest mistake that people make is they think, okay, well, if I'm not cutting, then I can eat like an asshole. And
Right.
it's not, there's no dichotomy there.
Yeah.
The difference between you, especially if you've got a goal of losing a lot of body fat, the difference between you in a cut and you maintaining what you have is not food choices.
No.
It's the amount of food that you eat. So you're still eating chicken breast, you're still eating fish, you're still eating lean steak. I mean, I'm 225 pounds and I still get flank steak, the leanest cut of steak. I still get chicken breast. I don't eat chicken thighs. I still, eat shrimp regularly when I can. And so you don't go back to regularly eating pizzas and cheesesteaks all of a sudden. You might eat it occasionally, but you can eat that occasionally on a cut too. And so the foods that you choose will typically never change unless you go into like a big build and you require much higher calories and satiety becomes a problem, like you're just feeling overly full. It's literally the only time because going to maintenance, you might lighten up a little bit on certain things, but you're largely going to be eating what is considered traditionally healthy foods. All right. Are there any benefits from lifting heavy but not to failure? Yes. Now, like we've said in the past, you always want to be lifting in proximity to failure, close to failure. If we're asking like, well, are there any benefits to lifting heavy but not to failure? I would think that if you're still saying you're lifting heavy, there's not like injury or anything like that in play. Maybe they just don't want to go to failure. You can be anywhere from 0 to 2 reps short of failure in advanced trainees and maximize hypertrophy gain. You can be 2 reps away and you're still maximizing hypertrophy. You can be 3 or 4 reps away and still be maximizing strength. Strength, this is very counterintuitive, does not have to be as close to failure as hypertrophy to progress optimally. You can be farther away from failure. So are there benefits to lifting heavy but not training to failure? Yeah, a lot. And in fact, you should probably make the majority of your training not to failure. This is a catch-22 for a coach to say because most people don't know what failure is. And if we tell you to go to failure, you're usually about 3 reps short of failure.
So you're still shy of it. Yeah.
You're still shy of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's this answer that's given on paper, and then there's the answer in the real world. And for coaches that are listening to this, sometimes it's just better to tell your clients to go to failure
Yeah. Because they're still not going to be a
because they're still not going to failure. And this is shown in literally all the research. This is shown in the research when we look at trained athletes. Even trained athletes don't really hit failure very reliably. They're usually 2 or 3 reps off. Non-trained athletes like beginners are typically 5 or more reps off. I've had multiple people, when I've done intensity checks with them, be 25 reps off.
Same. And like let's talk about that for a minute because that's wild. Like
It's more than twice as many reps that were
to be
prescribed.
25 reps, like you're getting 25 more reps than you should have gotten for that set. Like if you were truly taking the exercise to failure, like you're not even close.
No, which means it's like a normal person just going in and picking up a pencil and doing curls with a pencil and being
Yeah.
like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
And that's not how it feels to these people.
No.
People think that it feels like they're working hard, but people just don't know what working hard really
Yeah.
feels like until you start to really test these things. And I think that in the time period where that example came from, I think that she was supposed to be getting 8 reps and she ended up getting 33 instead of 8. And she had been in this training block for like 6 or 8 weeks. And so those 6 or 8 weeks, there were no benefits from
Yeah.
from that
From
exercise.
that
There
exercise.
were no benefits from that exercise
Yeah.
because it was so far off
Not
from
doing anything.
proximity to failure that she might as well just not have done that lift.
Yeah. I
You
had
know?
I want people to hear this part too because this is not like I had an IFBB pro who was working with me a couple years ago. And so this is a woman who she has her pro card in figure. She knows how to lift weights, right? Obviously. She failed an intensity check. She was off 18 reps on seated cable rows, and she is an IFBB pro. So if an BB pro can get this wrong, pretty much anybody can. So this is
Yeah.
not to say that like this just happens to like your average run of the mill person. We're talking about people who have made their lives and their livelihood in bodybuilding can fail these intensity checks sometimes. So I don't want anybody to feel bad about that, but the proximity to failure is such a misunderstood feeling in most people.
Yeah, and most people would say then, okay, well, she's an IFBB pro. It clearly didn't stop her. No, she succeeded in spite of that,
But
which
yeah,
means
yeah,
she has other exercises where she is taking it close to failure. But you do these types of things because there are certain, like she might feel like a T-bar row and she might be able to get that really well.
correct.
So
And
she's clearly,
she's got great back development. So
yeah,
she's doing something right somewhere.
right. It just was not that
Just
exercise.
not that
And so
exercise.
that's why it's important to do these tests. I will do one every training block with my one-on-one clients, and I randomize
Yep.
the picks of my exercises, and I try not to be a complete asshole. Like I don't pick like, okay, it's deadlift time. Let's go.
Deadlift.
Let's,
Yeah.
you've got 6 reps. Let's go to absolute failure and like
Or
have somebody
bench
throw their
press when they
back
don't
out.
have a spotter. Yeah, I'm the
Yeah,
same. Yeah.
but so I keep things relatively, realistic, but saying that you're probably off in this, one is backed up by all the research. Two, even advanced people get this
Yeah.
wrong occasionally and sometimes very wrong occasionally, like that example. But that doesn't mean that your the way that you train overall is wrong. That means that maybe this type of exercise doesn't jive with you quite as much, and you need to learn what it actually feels like to challenge that musculature in this exercise. And so by having these random checks where you're like, okay, well, I'm supposed to be getting like 8 to 10 reps of this. I'm just going to take that weight that I thought that I should do, and I'm just going to go until I fail in the middle of a rep. Get a spotter if you need to, use the spotting arms to stay safe, and then do that. And occasionally check different lifts. And I guarantee you're going to find some from time to time where you're
I
like, oh
agree.
shit, I'm a lot off on that one. And then you adjust the way that you're lifting. You adjust the load that you lifted or the reps that you lift, and you move forward. But this is one of those forever learning experiences.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that is very, very important for people to understand because it makes such a big difference long term.
Hmm.
All right, guys, that's it for us today. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the No Bull Just Bacon podcast. If you have any questions, reach out to us on our social media links, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, any of the comments sections on Spotify and Apple, and we will get to your questions in future episodes. Thanks a lot, guys.